Welcome to Lab Life with the Air Force Research Laboratory.
We are here today with Captain Michael Nayak. He was a research section chief at the Air Force Maui Optical and Supercomputing Site. He is now an experimental flight test engineer and went kite surfing in Antarctica.
In 3, 2, 1.
So, before we kind of cut into everything, the big crux of the story here we're going to be telling is that you went down to the South Pole to do some amazing work. And we heard after an interview you did beforehand that there was wind sailing involved.
There was, yes. So one of the things about optical astronomy, which is, and we'll talk about this, what I went down to the South Pole to do is you really want the air to be nice and still. All right. So, the second there's a lot of wind, snow starts getting kicked up. You get your whiteout conditions, and then it's just no fun to do astronomy. So what do you do when you're not working at the South Pole? It's not like you can go down to Starbucks and kick your feet up. So it's windy. So why not take advantage of the wind? So one of the things that me and a couple of other folks did while we're down there is, so coming from Maui, which is where my assignment with the research lab was at the time, we did a lot of kite surfing. And so when the wind kicked up, we basically would take a kite surfing kite and a snowboard. And we've got, a ton of snowboard and skis out there. And we go line up with the wind and try to run back and forth across the South Pole. So there's the ceremonial South Pole. So there's just a nice open space there. So we just try to go back and forth and see how far we could get with the wind. And then when the wind died down, well, then it's back to work.
That's amazing, though. So what was your record then? I guess the longest record someone had for kite surfing.
Oh, boy. I don't know what the longest ever was. I can tell you my personal best was a quarter mile, which the winds were. But the trick is, and here's the thing about, and if anybody kite surfs and is listening to this, they know this already. It's real easy to go one way with the wind. It's not so easy to turn around and come back. So you could really go for miles. But at some point, you want to get enough steam that you can sort of do this turn and then tack upwind. And so that's the real skill. And so the most that I was able to tack upwind and come back was a quarter mile.
That's impressive. So I imagine that wasn't, you said, too common, or there was quite a few times you were able to kind of hone your skills down there?
A handful of times, unfortunately, just because of time constraints or what. But, it's always daylight. So when it's windy, as long as you, have the time and the equipment handy, you can go do it.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
It was great. I'm not going to lie. You want to cover every inch of your skin because that wind will bite. But, it was pretty great.
Ooh, yeah, I can imagine.
It's pretty great to kite surf in Maui and then windsurf at the pole. I will say that.
See, it's cool. You already had some skills there, so it was transplantable.
Well, let's just say that there's less people at the South Pole, so there were less people to see me eat it.
Hey, that's fair. So kind of going a little ahead, though, jumping back to what you're doing now. So correct me if I'm wrong, but you're practicing right now in flight?
So at the moment, I am a flight test engineer with the U.S. Air Force Test Pilot School. And actually, this year is the 75th year of Test Pilot School. So the school is actually older than the Air Force. My job now is to be a flight test engineer. So 2 days ago, I got to backseat in an F-16, and we ran a test at supersonic speeds on some weapons delivery. So that's my job right now. Is I'm a student at Test Pilot School, learning to be an experimental flight test engineer, and then so it's back to school again, and then by the end of this year, at the 75th anniversary of Test Pilot School, there will be 24 of us that will be test pilots and test engineers testing the new generation of aircraft for the Air Force.
That is amazing. So was this something you naturally saw happening with your career path, or did this kind of find itself when you came back from Antarctica?
Well, I've always wanted to go to test pilot school. And in a lot of ways, that was part of my motivation for joining the Air Force. And this is just going back to, that amazing book, The Right Stuff, right? If you've read that book, it's all about the Mercury 7 astronauts. And the first half of the book is about their time at test pilot school. And I thought to myself, wow, this place sounds amazing. It's where you basically go and there's a saying that a test pilot school's average day is an average pilot's worst day. And I thought to myself, that sounds like the kind of place that I would like to go be a part of. And now that I'm here, it's It's absolutely amazing. So that's something I wanted to try and get to in my career at some point. But I have been fortunate that in the meantime, I was able to develop my scientific credentials as well. And that's what took me to Antarctica. So I would say that actually they're kind of on two opposite ends of the spectrum. My old
Yeah.
job, so the Antarctica thing is all the way over in like basic research, right? We're fundamental techniques, and we're really just a step past theory, like equations. And then test is all the way at the other end of the spectrum where you have this one-of-a-kind prototype, and your job as the test pilot and the test engineer is to make sure that it is safe to build 100 of these, and when regular pilots and regular engineers start flying in them, they're not going to go kill themselves. So it's the other end of the development spectrum.
Well, that's awesome. So working at both ends then, do you have one that you'd say you'd prefer, or is there kind of things about both you really enjoy?
The skills of one apply to the other. And in fact, I think this is part of the reason why Test Pilot School is such a unique organization. They are right at the edge of development, right? It's almost a product that's out there to the warfighter. However, they have a strict focus on research because it's like this is the last gate to clear. And we really want to find out as much about the system as possible. So I would say that as opposed to having just tests and just researchers, Test Pilot School is really this unique place where the two meet in the middle. And that's why I'm thrilled to be here. So it's skills from both. I think you wouldn't be a very good tester if you didn't understand the research and the theory. And you're not a very good researcher if you don't know what the user wants.
That's amazing. That's really cool. So kind of touching on that then, you're talking about how you've been looking forward to doing this position for some time. Going back to when you were in Antarctica, how did you feel when you were initially offered that position?
Oh, incredibly excited. I would say that was another dream come true. The South Pole is such a unique place. It is hard to get to. And that's for good reason. It's remote, it's dangerous, but there's also there's a mission there, and that mission is scientific research. And so to get there, you have to prove to the National Science Foundation, and just as a bit of background, the National Science Foundation runs the entire U.S. Antarctic program. So you have to convince the NSF that your research is not only NSF quality, but also that it can only be accomplished or can be accomplished better at the South Pole than anywhere else in the world. When I found out that our project Landit had been selected, I was absolutely thrilled and excited. And that project is still continuing.
Oh, very nice. Yeah, actually touching on that. So talking about Landit, since you mentioned it, can you kind of explain that for our viewers, like what the Landit project covered and what your goals are doing the basic research you did?
Absolutely. So I think Landit in one line, and I'll explain this in just a moment, is can we apply established what we call astroseismology techniques to Jupiter and Saturn? And once we build the right tools there, can we then apply them to the interior of satellites, which is something that the Air Force is interested in? So what does all of that mean? What it means is that there is seismic activity within stars. And we've known this for a while. There are these things called pulsating stars, and they pulsate because there's action that's occurring in the interior. So the basic theory, if you want to think about it, is that interior processes dominate exterior observables. So if you're looking at a star from the outside, you don't necessarily need to delve into its interior physically to know what's happening there. The basic theory is that there are waves that are propagating inside the star, causing it to pulsate, right? And those waves are modified by whatever they pass through. So by the way that those waves are modified, we can tell something about the interior. And guess what? That's exactly what we do for earthquakes, right? We can detect earthquakes around the world from where they occurred. And that's actually a good thing because, so let's say there's an earthquake in Japan and we have an observing station in California. There is value in observing those waves in California because they have on their way across the earth, they go over, but they also go through the earth to get to California. And as they transit through the interior of the earth, they're modified by the interior of the earth. And that's actually how we found out a lot about what the interior of the earth looks like without actually having been there. So we decided, so that's seismology. And then there's helio or astroseismology, which is basically doing the same thing on stars. And so what we'd like to do, what Landit is trying to do, is to observe Jupiter and Saturn, which are gas giants. So they function a lot like stars. So we understand the physics of stars. We want to apply that to learning more about the interiors of Jupiter and Saturn, our largest neighbors. And that's what the NSF is interested in as well. But then for the Air Force, we'd like to see, well, okay, so we've established this theory by which the interior, whatever's in the interior, modifies the signal on the exterior. How about applying that to satellites? Can we tell something about the interior of satellites? So to return to my one line, which hopefully now makes a little more sense, what is Landit? Can we apply astroseismology techniques to Jupiter and Saturn? And once we build the right tools there, apply them to the interior of satellites.
That's perfect. That makes a lot of sense, honestly. So that's one of those things that when you explain to somebody at first, it can be difficult to grasp. But honestly, especially with the earthquake analogy, that's very easy to follow.
Oh, absolutely. The interior physics are a little bit different for Earth versus satellites versus Jupiter, but the principle is the same, right? You can use exterior observables to glean knowledge about the object's interior. In other words, you don't need to see into it. You just need to see it, whether that object is a star, a planet, or a satellite. That's the bigger picture. And part of it is we're hoping to prove that equivalence.
Definitely, yeah. And you said the research that you've now left is still continuing?
That's correct. So this year, I was fortunate enough to go down to the South Pole and set up a small optical telescope. And part of the purpose of that is, the pole is a very unique environment. And an optical telescope, so that's the wavelength that your and my eyes see, it's modified by cold, right? There's a ton of things that can go wrong when things get that cold. Your mount can freeze. So now you can't actually look at or track what you wanted to track. If you get ice on the lens, nothing really wants to function that well, right? If it's a radio telescope, radio telescopes love cold. And in fact, the South Pole has world-class 10-meter radio telescopes there. But there's a reason they don't have optical telescopes, and that's because it's really hard to keep those things working. So we needed to do some engineering to make sure that we understood how to deploy a telescope to that harsh environment. So now that we've learned those lessons, next austral summer, so think November, December of 2019, there's going to be another team heading down to the South Pole, the Landit team, and they're going to field a larger telescope that's actually going to look at Jupiter through the winter, right? So I was just there in the summer, which is daytime all the time, nighttime all the time. We're talking negative 100 Celsius, so south of negative 150 Fahrenheit, sustained, right? It just gets down there and stays down there. And so those are brutal operating conditions for, I think, just about any piece of equipment, but especially an optical telescope. But now that we've learned lessons, now we feel confident in trying to take that down there for that long a period and those harsher conditions. So that's what's going to be ongoing in 2019, and then hopefully additional analysis and a push from basic into applied research in the 2020 and further timeframe.
Perfect. And speaking of the brutal cold, like you mentioned, is that something, especially working as much as you did outside, that you became more acclimated to, or just you have good enough gear where it just wasn't a worry?
Great points both. I think it's really personality dependent, I would definitely say. I'm born and raised in California, and lived in Hawaii for the last 3 years. So I would say that my ability to acclimate is perhaps not what another person's ability to acclimate would be. But yeah. You definitely get used to the cold. Negative 20 was nothing at Fahrenheit. Negative 10 Fahrenheit, well, that was summer weather. That was, T-shirt and no gloves. That was great.
It's just so hard to fathom that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I promise you, when I left Hawaii for Antarctica, I could not even picture what negative 77 Fahrenheit would feel like. And now that I've done it, I can fathom it very well. I can picture it pretty vividly.
So since you mentioned leaving originally, so I had one question. I know I asked you this beforehand in a separate kind of interview, but what would you say if you were able to bring down something that you wish you would have known beforehand? Like, what else would you packed with you on your first trip?
I would have packed more off-time stuff, right? So I definitely made sure I wanted to take all of my mission equipment. I wanted to take tools. I wanted to take replacement glass, replacement wedges, replacement wires. And then I packed work clothes and computers and modems and gloves and all of that. And that's great. So that's, 14 hours out of a 24-hour day. What do you do with the rest of the day? So I did not pack anything. Well, hardly anything. Just like pajamas or stuff to hang out in. Cards would have been nice. I packed very practically. Definitely had all work stuff, had all the, equipment, but didn't really think about the personal aspect of it.
And you're right, that is important. That was a big question we thought about too, which was outside of kite surfing and kind of hanging out with the crew. Like, what did you guys do for downtime, or like when you were in that kind of isolated environment? How'd you kind of keep yourself entertained?
Well, I think the poll does a pretty good job of that as far as facilities go. So it is nice. It's one building, so they do a good job of trying to provide you with some measure of entertainment. So, for example, there's a quiet reading room, which has a library.
Oh, nice.
They have there's a lounge area with a pool table and darts and sofas and video games. And there's another like movie theater type room, which you can basically make dark, and there's sofas and you can watch movies or play video games. So there's also a greenhouse where you can go if you've just forgotten how plants smell, which does happen. There are no trees on Antarctica. So after a while, you start to forget what green grass smells like and that kind of thing, what humidity feels like. So they have a room for that. Yeah. So it's a hydroponic room because there's no soil allowed in Antarctica because it's foreign, right? It's a pollutant. So you can go in this room and it's very humid, warm, and sort of sit there and just people nap there for an hour or two. So, yeah, there are some facilities. There's books, movies, video games, places to hang out. So that part is very nice.
Well, that's great to hear. Speaking of those, the nice options you have, were there any fun traditions that teams of the South Pole have in terms of initiation or anything like that you got to enjoy?
Terrific question. And just like I would say, like a fighter squadron in the Air Force, the South Pole is steeped in traditions that have been born from, I would say, shared hardship. So a lot of the traditions are certainly focused on the winter, right? Because you got 8 months of darkness. No one can come and go. There's no airplanes. There's no, you're stuck with who you're stuck with. And so a lot of the traditions of the South Pole center around that bonding experience, which I haven't experienced. However, there were several great traditions of the summer. The big ones are obviously Thanksgiving and Christmas. And I was there for Thanksgiving. And, the station goes all out, right? Holidays are a chance to get together with your pole family because your real family isn't there and celebrate. So Thanksgiving was a great one. In the winter, there is a version of what's called a 300 Club, which is when it gets down to negative 100 degrees centigrade. There's a sauna in the pole building. So you can warm up to 200 there and then run outside and it's negative 100 outside. So I did not experience that because it never got down to a negative 100 C, but I did get to do sort of the 220 Fahrenheit Club, which is you get in the sauna and it's pretty warm, and then you run outside and it's negative 50 Fahrenheit. So that was a shock.
Definitely.
Yeah. And then other than that, I would say some of the big tradition style things are going into the ice tunnels under the South Pole. And this is where it's really helpful to have a cross section of folks that have been there before go with you, because they can explain sort of these random things. So in the ice tunnels, folks dig what they call shrines. It's basically you dig a little hole in the ice and you put something there that commemorates your time there. It's a collection from all the folks that were there. And so, you go down with somebody who's like, oh, yeah, I was here in the winter of 1994, and this was our shrine. And this is what that random shoe in the back means. So it's both entertainment to go down there and look through these tunnels that never melt and say, wow, okay, so that's what they were thinking back in 2004. The shrines were a nice tradition that I liked.
I had no idea. That's really interesting. So kind of touching on that I know you'd mentioned beforehand when I'd asked you kind of about things you brought down. You mentioned something about dark chocolate. So I don't know if that was something you said that was something people really enjoyed down there, or you wish you would have brought more, or what the story was there.
Anything new is great, right? Because when you live down at the South Pole and there is no, I mean, everything's frozen. The cooks do a fantastic job trying to resurrect great meal out of frozen food that's been buried in the ice. But, I think we can all agree that there's something missing from that. And so anything new is great, right? And chocolate, food that's fresh, so freshies, fruits and vegetables, all of that, people go nuts for it. It's like it's the novelty of it. So certainly one thing that helped me is to barter for is, hey, dark chocolate. And I was lucky. Some friends of mine really helped me out and mailed me just more chocolate than I could possibly eat. I love chocolate. So
hey, same. I agree.
Yeah. So there was just more that I could feasibly eat during my time there. So it was a great way to, break the ice, make some friends, trade for something maybe. So that was the story of I found dark chocolate to be a very effective currency.
That's great. Funny you mentioned this. We actually had a question about freshies. So I was watching Anthony Bourdain, and he went and visited Antarctica. Specifically, went to McMurdo Station,
right.
And there was like a club there, like some kind of really cool club where they mentioned like vegetables are called freshies. The researchers are called beakers, stuff like that. Like, did you go to the club, or was that common?
Yes, definitely. And right there, I would say it's one of the major differences between McMurdo and the South Pole. So McMurdo, for those folks that aren't aware, is sort of your gateway to Antarctica. That's your first stop. If you're part of the U.S. Antarctic program and you're not going to Palmer Station, which is all the way on the other side of Antarctica, so far, in fact, that you depart from Chile instead of New Zealand. And if you know how far apart South America and New Zealand are, then that gives you an idea of how big Antarctica is. But most people, I would say, come through McMurdo. That's on the coast, right? It's where Amundsen and Scott, the first two men to conquer the South Pole, they were on Ross Island, that's where they started from, and that's where McMurdo is, and that's why it's so big. And so McMurdo is sort of the big town in Antarctica, I would say, if you can call a town of 900 people a big town. But there are more people there, more supplies readily available, right? Because it's the coast, it's not as cold being a relative term, of course. But, planes are able to get in and out for longer. It's not cut off from the world for 6 months like the pole is. So you have a lot more, I would say, what you would think of as modern amenities to include entertainment options. and yes, so there is a club there. There's two bars, actually, as well. So the third one opens up periodically. And in addition to that, right down the ice, I should say, is the Kiwi Station. Right by McMurdo is Scott Base, which is run by the New Zealanders. And every Thursday, they have American night. So the Americans from McMurdo try to go down and hang out with the Kiwis and, drink their alcohol in their bar and then, reciprocate. So there's all kinds of options for nightlife, if I'm using that word with quotes, but you get the idea. So and it's great. It's terrific. You go out to the club at McMurdo and you see, maybe 200 people there just sort of kicking back. And so you mentioned the word beakers, which is kind of a slightly derogatory word for scientists. And it's because there's two kinds of people in Antarctica, right, for the U.S., because of the U.S. Antarctic program, we have it's a scientific research mission. So you've got scientists that are doing that work, like myself, and then you've got support folks. And those folks' job is to basically enable all of the science. So they are the loggies, the fuelies, the carpenters, the cooks, the bartenders, all of that, all of the you can think of it like a military base, right? Like an Air Force base. You've got the pilots who are sort of the tip of the spear, but then, they don't just fly the airplanes by themselves. There's this whole standing army of people that support them. And so that's the difference, right? So the beakers are the scientists and their postdocs and students and such. And then the support staff is everybody else. So it's one of the lovely things about the bar is everybody's there. There's not really anywhere else to go. So you see all kinds mixing together, chatting, friendly rivalries, trivia. It's terrific. So down at the South Pole, there's not really a bar. There's not really enough people to justify one. It's one building as opposed to a whole sprawling complex. But we have our fun moments.
Oh, yeah, and I'm glad to hear that you were able to partake in some of that, it sounds like, at
Oh,
McMurdo.
yeah. No, it's terrific. Weather delays early in the season tend to slow you down. So just as a bit of background, the LC-130s, the U.S. Air Force, owns the only ski-operated aircraft that fly into the South Pole, apart from Bashers. So if you're talking like regular transport, right, it's LC-130s, ski-operated C-130s. And they fly from McMurdo, but they do not like to stay at the pole. If they're at the pole, and there's weather, they will not shut down the engines because it could get so cold that the fuel lines literally freeze. So they will keep the engines running, and then as soon as they can, they will head back to McMurdo where they're based. So as a result of that, things are a little more limited at the pole. And so you only go when there's good weather. So I was lucky enough, even though the pole was my destination, to spend 3-4 days in McMurdo waiting for weather to clear enough for us to get out there.
Yeah. And speaking of like flying down in your journey, one big thing we know that we especially followed you on was your blog at michaelnayak.com/blog for people who are interested. And that was a big thing that was cool to kind of follow what you did and where you went. So was that your first really big blogging experience, or is this something you've done before?
No, this is definitely the first time. It's just, and it becomes such a consuming experience, I mean, there's so much prep that goes into it. And once you're down there, you're relatively cut off from the world. And I was a team of one. So I knew I would be working all the time. And so I really just wanted a way to try and document this experience, if not for others, then just for myself, in case I never got the opportunity to go back. And so I've never blogged before. This is the first time. And it just started off as more of a place to document my lessons learned for the team that's going to follow me in 2019, right? They're all newcomers to Antarctica as well. And there's certain lessons that just, you do this once, you learn a lot. And there's just certain things that you would do different. And you go twice and boy, you know so much more the second time. And then the third time, you're really a pro. So they say, just a random segue, actually, this reminds me, they say the first time you go to Antarctica, it's for the adventure. The second time, it's for the money. The third time is because you don't fit anywhere else anymore. So you learn a lot, and you really learn to adapt with your environment, harsh circumstances, and working all the time and that kind of thing. So it started off my blog as a way to just say to my co-PI, Ryan Swindle, who will come after me next year, to say, hey, before you go, read through this and just sort of figure out some do's and don'ts. And then it sort of just went from there. There were so many unique things I saw and interesting things and people that I don't think I would have met or experienced as part of my day-to-day life, that I just wanted a place to store those experiences. And that turned into an 18-part blog of my experience.
Yeah, which is extensive and really well done. And you're right. It's good that you could set that stage for the rest of your team, because most people, like you mentioned, couldn't fathom that negative 77-degree weather or a lot of the things you had to go through.
Absolutely. And now that I'm here, you mentioned negative 77. I'm in Southern California right now at Edwards Air Force Base for test pilot school. And it's February. And so, Southern California is pretty warm. It snowed yesterday. There was ice on my windshield this morning, and I was shocked and cold. And right. And some of my classmates are laughing at me saying, wait a minute, didn't you just come back from Antarctica? And I was like, yes, I did. But, just like you acclimate to the cold, we talked about that before, I acclimated to the warmth. And so just like that, so now I feel like if we talk 2 months from now and you ask me the same question of how was a negative 77, I'd be like, I don't know. It was bad. I definitely remember it being bad, but now I'm not in it anymore. I'm in plus 77 now. So it's hard for my brain to take itself back to that place. So just while I was in it, I wanted to write down the experiences as they were current and just freshest in my mind, and hopefully the most useful to anybody else that's either interested or is planning to go down themselves.
Absolutely, yeah. And speaking of, we actually had a few fan questions here we wanted to ask near the end. Was from Sophie C. And she mentioned, what are some of the best or worst moments while conducting research at the South Pole? So kind of like maybe some certain specific challenges or triumphs you may have had.
Okay. The South Pole is just, it's such a unique place. It's unlike, I've never been to space, but I imagine there's some parallels to be drawn there of just isolation and the environment's so harsh that it can punish you if you end up in it. That some of your best moments, to answer the first part of Sophie's question, some of the best moments are, I would say, to watch just regular tasks come to life in such a harsh environment. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that every win means so much more because you just felt like you fought for it. Like you braved the elements. The odds were stacked against you, and you still managed to come through. So I would say your best moments while conducting research are where you have really been struggling with something. And it's especially when it's something just simple. A great example is just rotating my telescope into its elevation azimuth mount. That's something you just pick up and put it on and futz with it a little bit, and boop, it just pops right into the treads. Well, except when it's cold, you have to take your gloves off and touch metal to do that.
Ooh.
Right. And so there's a serious risk of, I mean, if you touch that metal with your bare hands, you will burn your fingertips off. It's ironic using the word burn, but that's basically what happens. And so this simple task turns into this Herculean task. And so, and setting up the telescope every day and taking it down and setting it up and taking it down became a series of these Herculean events. And just when you got into a flow and you figured out the right way to do everything such that, and it is just so entirely different from the way that you would do it. Like if I would go to walk outside my house right now in Southern California and set up a telescope, it's just entirely different. You got to think 14 steps ahead, right? Because, for example, you forgot something. It's a half a mile walk back to the station in, -70 plus wind, and then a half a mile back, by which time your whole equipment is sitting out there by itself. So when you queue everything up and do it right and pull it off and you walk back inside the warmth and you take off your jacket and you turn on the computer and everything's working, it is just a huge, I remember there were times when I worked in this little building called Superdarn, which is about half a mile out from the main station by myself. And I would just sort of like raise my hands in the air and look around like, come on, anybody?
Round of applause,
that
please.
was amazing. Right. Right. So the best moments while conducting research are where just things click, you're in a rhythm, and it works out, and you just feel like you earned it. Conversely, the worst moments are probably when you just don't know what to do next. In the normal world, you would maybe go on the internet and Google around for something, but you got to wait for 10 hours for the satellite to be up, so that's not an option. Maybe you'd yell down the hallway, hey, Kent, can you come help me with this? So you've worked on this sort of stuff before. Just take a peek at it. Nope, well, that's not an option. And you just sort of, you feel like you've tried everything that you know how to try, and you feel like the day is wasted, right? Every day at the South Pole is like money, like currency, right? I mean, it is like the National Science Foundation is paying actual dollars for you to be, and every day is time that you don't have. And so one of the big challenges I think that I faced there was just owning up to the fact that, yep, I'm a team of one and nobody's going to figure this out for me, and I got to figure it out myself. And so sometimes that can be tough and challenging. And then you look out and there's nothing to the edge of the horizon. There's no help coming. And the weather forecast for tomorrow is supposed to suck. So no astronomy possible. So it's like, well, I've got 2 hours to figure this out and I have no clue. What do I do? So, but again, that's one of the great challenges, right? That's what makes that victory, again, so sweet, is when you figure it out and you make it work, then it's a huge win.
Yeah, and you mentioned it beforehand. Now that you have found out a lot of that stuff, your team should hopefully be better off. But that's challenges you would never consider at most other places. Unlike it's space, like you mentioned, somewhere that's kind of relatable.
Right. I don't know that firsthand, obviously, but yeah, that's exactly how it feels.
Yeah, and a final fan question we had then, one we kind of asked you beforehand, but I'd like to see the response here is out of the wildlife there, animals. Like what kind of cool animals do you get a chance to see? At
the South Pole, absolutely nothing. No, I'm serious. I mean, there is no food. There is no wildlife. It's hundreds of miles of flat plateau and blowing snow before you get to the South Pole. It's simply incredible to me that we can maintain a scientific a human presence this far from civilization. So there is no wildlife at the South Pole except for these crazy humans that are running around there for some
That
reason.
counts.
Yeah, absolutely. But down at McMurdo, I got to see kind of the three major wildlife species in Antarctica. Period. The first are penguins, of course.
Nice.
Got to see penguins up front, up close and personal, and then seals. And seals eat penguins. So of course, where there's where there's prey, there must be a predator. And so we got to see seals. They would come out of the sea ice and sort of sunbathe on the icebergs. So that was pretty cool. And finally, the third species was skua. And skua are these awful, clever birds. They're huge. Yeah. And they just, I don't know where they come from or what they live on. I'm sure a biologist could give you a better answer. But basically, if you get a plate from the cafeteria and you walk toward your dormitory with it, the skua will come out of nowhere and basically dive bomb you and smash into that plate and scatter all over the ground. And then like 5 other skuas will come in and just, eat all that up while you cow in fear. And
that's like horrifying.
Yeah, they're organized. I'm telling you, there's some real mafia stuff at work there. So the skuas, the penguins, and the seals, and the humans. Who, boy, let me tell you, there are some unique individuals down there.
Okay. So at least 3 out of the 4 were great, and then the skua.
No, 4 out of 4 were the skua.
That's amazing. Yeah, it makes me think of seagulls because I have a family that lives near the coast, and I've seen them do some not quite dive bombing, but pretty close in terms of stealing food.
Right, fairly aggressive. Yeah, you start to wonder. I mean, it's Antarctica. You got to do what you got to do.
And kind of rounding things up here, then, would you recommend for other people to, if given the chance, to visit McMurdo Station or visit the South Pole if they had the option?
Absolutely. If you want a perspective on human endurance, the ability that we have to turn nothing into something, and just an amazing thirst for knowledge, go to Antarctica. And the U.S. Antarctic program is incredible. It is set up to foster basic research for humanity's benefit in one of the most hostile places on the planet. And to see that, and better yet, to be part of it, is incredibly inspiring. And so, even secondhand, just watching that, what people go through to learn more about our planet and try to figure out these really tough puzzles that can't be solved anywhere else on the planet, it's inspiring. And apart from that, the people are amazing, right? So is what I'm saying, that you're not going to meet these people at a bar or, living down the street from you, because they're off in crazy places doing crazy things. And when you're one of those crazy people with them, I think it really inspires you.
Yeah.
It's the art of the possible. So, and then apart from that, just to see this barren landscape. I mean, I don't know if we will get to the surface of another planet in my lifetime, but boy, if you want to know what that feels like, I imagine Antarctica would not be too bad a place to start.
You're right. It's almost like going to another world. So that's fair.
The ice planet Hoth came up a lot.
I could totally imagine that. So the final question we've been asking a lot of people just to get a good feel, what would you say is your favorite invention from the Air Force as a whole, if you have one?
Okay, so I'm sure that there's several answers that I could give you to this, but I'll give you the one that I think is most Antarctica related. How about that?
Yeah.
So the Air Force runs the airlift mission in and out from New Zealand to Antarctica and back. So it's Air Force C-17s that do the run between intercontinent, and then on the continent it's LC-130s and Twin Otters. And I got to say, it is amazing to me how much these planes can carry and get off the ground and get somewhere safely. So as you head to the south of the world, all those lines of longitude start to converge on each other. So navigating with a compass is impossible. So if I stand at the South Pole, every direction is going to show me north on my compass. Yeah. So it makes navigation crazy hard. And the Air Force and the Navy before it have perfected the art of navigation with GPS. So first, small answer is GPS. But second answer is these Herculean airplanes, and it's kind of a pun because the Herc is the C-130. But These planes do amazing things, and they can land on ice. They can land on snow. The pilots are incredibly skilled, and they carry hundreds of thousands of pounds, millions of pounds across the year in and out of Antarctica to help this mission happen. So I would say my favorite invention, I'm part of test pilot school, part of my job is going to be testing these aircraft of the future. And this is part of the reason why I'm just really excited to do it, because I got to see them in action. These incredibly outfitted airplanes, the C-130 was built with something else entirely in mind. And then they said, well, can we support Arctic operations? Yeah, absolutely. Let's adapt this plane. Let's put some skis on it. Let's give it some cold-proof equipment. And let's send it in there and see what happens. And that's how our Antarctic program thrives. So my favorite invention of the Air Force is GPS and these incredibly flexible and helpful cargo airplanes.
Absolutely, to make sense for your mission. So that's an excellent answer.
Can't do it without it.
Sweet. So before we wrap up here, then, is there any final words you'd have for people looking to not only just maybe work in Antarctica, but maybe just going in the career field and trying something challenging or something new like you did?
Advice I would give to others is, get educated and keep getting educated. Opportunities emerge when you keep widening your knowledge base. I started off as an aerospace engineer and went to Antarctica as a planetary scientist. And also, don't listen to the naysayers. There's many, many, many unique opportunities, but you got to work for them. And I'm very thankful for how unique my career has been. But I think I owe that uniqueness to being able to take a whole bunch of no's and keep going until I found a yes. So if you search for people that understand and share your passion, get good advice, then I would say anybody can do it.
Awesome. Sorry, I was just writing that down. That was a good quote.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
So thank you, everyone, for listening. If you want to look at Captain Michael Nyack's blog, just go to www.michaelnyack.com/blog. If you want to see more on when the podcast will be coming out and keep up with Lab Life, you can check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube at AF Research Lab. And make sure just to stay curious.
Logging off.